welcome. Health Issues. I'm your host, Chris Sylvain, and totally elated and excited today. We have literally, I will say, one of my definitely favorite guests, and it's a third time on, and we'll be on plenty more. We have Dr. Lydia Bazzano. She's Associate Professor of Epidemiology over at Tulane University and in medicine, and we're just excited to have her. Thank you, Dr. Bazzano. How are you?
Thank you. Great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. It's always good. We say Associate Professor of Epidemiology, but literally, she's a great physician. Spends a lot of time as a physician, but she's a nutrition researcher and has done some great studies and deals with food and nutrition from a deeper perspective than that you would normally hear. We'll leave it that way. That's good? Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, we'll leave it there. The medical folk know what we're talking about. All right. Everybody else, they'll figure it out. Okay, but that's good. Let's start off in general about health and nutrition, and before we even move forward, the biggest issues in nutrition right now, you know, people are talking about low carb and high carb. Tell us a little bit about this idea of low carb, and I think you're doing some work on that now too.
I am doing some work on that, and I just recently finished a study on a sensible low-carb diet versus low-fat diet for weight loss. And what I mean by sensible low-carb diet is one where you choose the fats that are better for you, and you choose poultry and fish as sources of protein. So you're not eating red meat and mayonnaise for breakfast, which is what I think everybody who has ever heard of the low carb diet thinks that they're going to get to eat butter and all those wonderful sorts of things, which you can do in moderation. Okay. But a sensible low carb diet versus a low fat diet is what we studied.
All right, and let's break it down. First, let's describe what a low-fat diet looks like.
Okay, so a low-fat diet, with a low-fat diet, you're aiming for less than 30% of your total calories from fats. Okay. And each gram of fat gives you about 9 calories versus carbohydrates, which give you 4, or protein, which give you about 4. Okay.
All right, good. So on at the Sam's or the Walmart or the Winn-Dixie, if somebody wanted a low-fat diet, what would they be purchasing, and what would their meals look like?
Okay, so if you're going to be on a low-fat diet at the Sam's or the Walmart, you might be choosing oatmeal or cereal with skim milk. Fruits generally don't have much fat in them. Okay. But all of these things, if you notice, that they tend to be things that have a lot of carbohydrate in them, and sometimes they have a lot of added sugars too, especially the cereals or your oatmeal. That's usually like maple and brown sugar oatmeal or something like that. So the problem with a lot of low-fat products, and as we've gotten to be a low-fat nation, we've definitely over time decreased the amount of fat in our diet overall, but we're also gaining weight, and some of that may have to do with the fact that there's a lot of added sugar in a lot of those low-fat products to make them taste better. Yeah, and salt too.
Yeah, because if somebody's eating oatmeal and cereal and those types of foods, they would think, hey, I'm on a diet, I ought to be losing weight.
Oh yeah, and that's for breakfast. And then for lunch, you know, you might have something that if you have a sandwich, or for lunch you might have white bread, and usually white bread doesn't have any fiber, or if you're having rice with your meal, or potatoes, it's usually white rice, and all those things are low fat. Right. So they can have that health claim that you might see, that little, you know, low fat health claim on the box or on whatever it is, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to help you lose weight, or that it's going to necessarily help your nutrition as a whole.
Wow. And that's it, because people they're working hard to do that, because they would much rather, you know, eat something a little more filling, and so they're starving themselves the way they feel, and they're not getting the taste that they want, and they're still gaining weight.
Right. Or if they're not necessarily gaining weight, they're not necessarily losing weight too.
Okay,
you know,
good point.
Might not be
I guess you're right. Okay, so if they're reducing a lot of those calories, but it's for all of the hard work that they're doing, and then when they walk around the track for an hour, and if they drink a Coca-Cola, they just wipe that out. So
yeah, it might not be as effective as you know, some other techniques, basically. And that's what we were looking at. We were looking at the effectiveness of this a sensible lower carbohydrate diet versus the low-fat diet.
All right, so let's talk about the low carb.
Okay, so our low carbohydrate diet was one in which I mentioned we were trying to choose the good fats. So those are the unsaturated fats, the monounsaturated fats like olive oil and canola oil when you're cooking, and then the polyunsaturated fats, which come from other vegetables, and when you're eating say avocados or nuts, there's polyunsaturated fats in those. So those things are satisfying because they have some fat in them, but they're the good fats, and those good fats actually help reduce your cholesterol a little bit and perhaps increase the good cholesterol. That's what we found. And other research has shown that too. And then the protein, because you're going to replace the carbohydrates with fat and protein, healthy fats, and then lean proteins like fish and chicken. You can have the occasional red meat. You don't want to overdo it on that. But vegetable proteins as well. So your legumes, don't forget about those.
All right, legumes are...
Oh, sorry,
in
beans.
New Orleans language.
Yeah, beans, your red beans. Gotta have your red beans. But also black beans, soybeans, whatever kind of beans you're eating.
Beans, and more beans on Mondays, every Monday.
They're good. They're very good for you.
Okay. Now, all right, and it's low carb, but when we think of carb, we always think of rice, starches or whatever, but you can have whole grain.
Yeah, absolutely. So low carb, when we talk about carbohydrates, we usually talk about the total amount of carbohydrates. But the digestible amount of carbohydrates is less than that because fiber is not digestible, but it's considered a carbohydrate. So when you look on your package and it says total carbohydrates, if that food has a lot of fiber, you would then subtract off the amount of fiber from that when you're thinking about the amount of carbohydrate you're eating, because you can't digest it. And fiber, dietary fiber, has a lot of really good qualities. It can obviously help make you more regular, your digestive system, and then also it helps build up the good flora, the good bugs in your digestive system. So
the real bugs. We get back to the bugs.
Yeah.
The movie bugs. All right, now, so real quick, I just got to grab a hold to that. So if somebody's looking at the label to figure out if it's low carb, they take the total carbohydrate and they subtract the amount of fiber, and then I'll let them know if it's low carb or not.
Pretty much, yeah. That'll give you the amount of digestible carbohydrates. Okay. And so that's what you would add up over the course of a day if you're trying to stay below a certain level. Okay. And then also, if you're going to be looking at the amount of carbohydrates in there, it's important to look at the amount that's just sugar as well, because there's two lines under the carbohydrate on the label. It'll be sugars and it'll be dietary fiber. There's at least those two lines. So the more fiber, the less sugars, the better for you usually.
Okay, now, and even the sugar line, it doesn't differentiate whether we're dealing with refined sugars or what else is it? I mean, does it mean anything?
Yeah, so usually the sugars are the more easily digestible. I mean, the complex carbohydrates usually don't go in just the sugars line. Okay. So, and then those more complex carbohydrates are harder to digest, so that's better. Right.
But the term sugar in and of itself, when we were looking at, in other words, say if we're taking whole brown rice, all right, it'll have a certain amount of sugars in it, but it's good.
Right, because that brown rice is not refined. brown rice versus white rice because they don't take off the seed coat, and it's that seed coat that makes it harder to digest.
Right.
So you have to look at the source of your foods too, as well. So.
That's deep. So you got to go to school or go to Walmart.
Sometimes. There is what's called the grocery store diet. I think a lot of nutritionists give the advice that if you stay at the outside perimeter of the grocery store, then you're mostly on the produce aisle, so you're getting your fruits and your vegetables, and then, you know, around the edges you'll have your meat aisle where you can potentially choose your fish and chicken and your lean proteins. And then, gosh, I don't know what's on the other end. You have dairy, the low-fat dairy products, right? And then that's another food group.
That's another show. Oh wow! All right. So low carb. So whole grains. We can have.
You can have whole grains, high fiber, high protein. Whole grains have both of those things. They're usually helpful.
So we're good. So we can have spaghetti in the morning. I mean, not in the morning, but for lunch and dinner, you can have spaghetti. You can have brown rice and beans and rice, and black-eyed peas, and you know, butter beans. My mama used to cook butter beans.
Oh, they're so good.
Yeah.
Butter beans, lima beans, navy beans.
Oh yeah, and those little bitty beans. Yeah, so beans, and more beans.
Beans have a lot of fiber in them. They actually have a lot of soluble fiber in them. You wouldn't think so because it's not something that it doesn't taste like cardboard. Everybody expects fiber to taste like cardboard, but it doesn't.
Right. Okay.
So the beans in particular have a lot of soluble fiber. Soluble fiber helps prevent you from absorbing cholesterol. It helps prevent your cholesterol levels from being really high in your blood. So you can actually get a reduction in your cholesterol just from soluble fiber.
Wow.
And in some of the research that I've done over time, we looked at how much beans, legumes, that people were eating, and over 19 years, those people who ate more of the beans had a lower rate of coronary heart disease than those people who ate less of the beans. Now, I mean, you have to, of course, think about how you're cooking them. You don't want to put a lot of fat in. You don't want to make that food dish unhealthy with too much salt or too much unhealthy fat. So you have to be careful with your red beans and rice, but you can definitely have that in a healthy diet.
So for those who cook red beans, if they take the big smoked ham hock, not smoked but cured with about a gram of salt, and then they chop up sausage and put it in there also, and then they add more salt into the beans. That would.
Yeah, that's probably not going to lower your cholesterol. No, that one might not work.
That would work.
So.
But the argument is, you can take a ham hock, and you can still use, if it's not cured, if it's not full of salt in and of itself, or you can take the turkey necks. All right, turkey necks that's not cured, not salted, but it could be smoked, but not salted.
Yeah, the smoking process doesn't add any salt. That's just getting the flavor in there, and so you can keep the flavor in your foods, but you don't need as much salt and as much fat, just like you were mentioning.
Sounds good. And let me ask you this, because it's brown rice and you have the beans, okay? And, all right. Wouldn't it add more flavor that you wouldn't need as much seasoning in and of itself because you're using whole grains?
Yeah, brown rice does have a nutty kind of a flavor.
Right,
so for people who are really interested in trying different foods, and for just about everybody out there, you know, when you put the beans on it, you don't taste the rice as much anyway, and the nutty flavor is kind of good. I think a lot of people like it. So.
Agreed. They just have to cook it longer.
You just have to cook it longer.
Yeah, most people, they try and cook the brown rice in 15 minutes, put it in the colander, and it's all
like
mushy.
The quick cooking grits versus the longer cooking grits. So, you know.
All right.
It's a little bit slower, but it's really good.
Okay. Well, let's get back to the nitty-gritty. What's the difference between the two? How did the study come out? How did it affect the human system?
Oh, so it was a really interesting study with the sensible low carbohydrate diet. People lost a little bit more weight than both groups lost weight because we did counsel them on portion control,
okay.
and again, I mentioned good fats and bad fats.
Okay.
And people were motivated to lose weight. These were overweight people to begin with, so
okay. All right.
they were looking to lose some weight.
Okay.
And the low-fat group lost a little bit of weight over the course of a year and then tended to regain it back. The low-carb group lost a little bit more weight than the low-fat group and gained it back a little bit less. So at the end of a year, they had lost more weight compared to the low-fat group.
Okay, getting it.
And they also lost it from their belly.
Wow, right.
Which, yeah, is a problem area for a lot of people.
That's it.
And so losing that from the belly is particularly significant because we think that that kind of fat is more active in terms of regulating your heart health and also, you know, your response to sugars like diabetes and lipids in your blood. So.
Amazing. Now, when you look at both of them, you say you lost more weight with the low carb. That's the same amount of calories that each person ate. You made the calories equivalent.
The same amount of calories.
About the same, but they still lost more weight, even though it was the same amount of calories.
They still lost more weight.
Calorie might be a calorie. Is a calorie.
You're right. So that's the question: is a calorie a calorie? As you know. So I mean, the whole. I think a lot of our beliefs have been so far that just cut back calories and you will lose weight. And it does seem to be true, but there's certainly some calories you can cut back and it may be more effective to lose weight versus cutting back other calories.
That makes sense. Now let's go back to the belly fat, all right? And go on and explain that's the deeper inner fat, not just the...
Right, so that's not just the fat that's under your skin, that's the fat that's inside, because that kind of fat is actually under the abdominal wall, so it's under your muscles and your abdomen, but it's in and around organs like your liver, which is your center of metabolism where you respond to a lot of the things that come into your body. And then it's also, you know, all around all of your digestive organs, like your intestines, your stomach, your spleen, your gut, everything that's in there. That's the fat that surrounds it all and gives us a soft belly.
All right. And all around there, now, a couple of questions. We didn't talk about this before. Does, when that type of fat is more dangerous than everywhere? Right.
So fat in the belly that kind of makes it protrude or give you that apple shape is considered to be more dangerous. It's riskier to have. It puts you at a higher risk of heart disease down the road than does fat in your legs or your shoulders or other areas that's just under the skin around the muscles.
And so somebody's more than likely to have higher cholesterol, insulin resistance, diabetes, and high blood pressure even.
All those things if they have the fat that's in their belly that pushes the belly out a lot of times versus the fat that's just in the areas around the muscles and the rest of the body.
So shape is more important than weight.
I wouldn't say it's more important than weight. They're both important because you don't want to be overweight for your height. The weight for height ratio is called the body mass index or the BMI. And anything over 25 for your weight in kilograms over your height in meters squared is considered overweight. 25 to 30 is considered overweight. 30 and above is considered obese.
Got it.
So you have to be careful of the weight for your height, and then the shape is a second factor that determines whether or not you'd eventually develop heart disease, your risk of eventually developing heart disease down the road.
Okay, good.
Or diabetes, because weight is the biggest risk factor for diabetes as well.
So it's better to be like this.
It's better
as
to be a
opposed
pear shape than the apple shape, is what most folks have studied, and the evidence shows that it seems to be better to be pear-shaped than apple-shaped.
I got it. Okay, okay. Now, so I'm gonna ask you this: is it a revolving cycle that the more you have here, the less you're able to lose weight?
So,
or harder it is to lose weight?
Well, the more you have here, the more health consequences you have from it.
Okay.
I don't think it's necessarily that it's harder to lose weight, but it can be. It can certainly be harder in some pockets. So if you have weight that's in a particular area like the belly, then it does produce what we call adipocytokines, which are inflammatory or inflammation molecules, and that can change the signaling throughout your body and make it a little bit easier for you to get heart disease, easier for you to get diabetes. Okay. And there's some evidence that it affects appetite, so maybe it's harder for you to lose weight.
That's where I was going. Yeah, so I'm going to rephrase.
Okay.
All right, if I have more here, all right, and so therefore I might have to, will it be where I have to try harder because I'm hungrier?
Yeah, so that there are issues about there's definitely research related to appetite and a whole bunch of new hormones that were recently discovered that regulate appetite, and so we're just now looking at some of the effects of these new hormones and how diet interacts with them. So we did actually look at our appetite hormones in the low-fat and the low-carbohydrate dietary study. Okay. And we didn't find a difference.
All right. Okay, not a problem. But all right, let me tell you where it goes back to. People will say, well, man, I can smell food and gain weight. But Billy over here, he can eat all day long and he doesn't gain any weight. How does that?
So that's definitely related to metabolic efficiency. So Billy probably has some different genetic makeup, and or he's eating some different things too, probably. Okay. I mean, are you saying that they were on the same diet?
Well, that's what everybody would say. But let's say they're on the same diet. Is it?
Okay.
Okay.
So if they're on exactly the same diet, then it's probably Billy, and doing exactly the same amount of physical activity is probably Billy's metabolism is slightly different, or genetically he may just have more muscle, or because muscle burns calories more so than fat or any other tissue, really.
All right. Well, let's flip it back. Man, it's time. We need more time. We got to come back. All right. Now, so Billy's doing the same thing that, say, Billy and Becky, but because of her, Becky has more here. Does that automatically mean she has less muscle and probably metabolism is slower? So,
well, when you change the names to Billy and Becky,
all right,
change it a lot. No, that's all right. That's all right. But it doesn't necessarily mean that, but it's more likely that Becky has less muscle mass than, say, Billy, and so is burning calories less efficiently than Billy. Because Becky's a woman, so she automatically has less muscle mass. Usually, that's okay.
Billy and Bubba, all right. All right, we got it. Amazing. Time is moving on. Okay. But before we end, let's talk about dairy. All right, tell me.
So dairy is very good for you.
Okay.
And studies like the Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension study showed that low-fat dairy can actually help lower your blood pressure. And that's probably because it has a good amount of calcium, potassium, magnesium, all of these minerals that your body uses in different processes.
Okay.
It's also got protein. And so when dairy goes through your mouth into your gut system, it stimulates the receptors and the hormones that say, oh, I'm feeling kind of full, and I can digest this more slowly. So dairy has all of those good qualities. Now, it also has some saturated fat in it, so it's best to use the low-fat dairy products.
Okay.
But overall, dairy tends to be a very good food for your health state in general.
So I can eat macaroni and cheese.
No. Macaroni, well, if you're eating the whole wheat macaroni, and the low-fat cheese, you got it. You're doing good. Not a lot of butter.
Not a whole lot of butter.
And not a lot of salt.
Is there a low-fat butter? I guess you come up with
There are tons of them. Actually, they have water in them that's mixed into them to decrease the amount of fat that's in them.
So we can keep taste, and that's all the pastas and and we can go right there. Now, so fat for fat, say the same amount of saturated fat, low-fat dairy, and say a burger or whatever, because it's dairy, is better than another product with the same amount of saturated fat. Would you think?
So it all also depends on what kind of fats make up that saturated fat. There are different lengths of chains of the fatty acids, so certain ones can be better for you than others.
Wow. Long chain, medium chain?
Right.
Okay, it's getting deep.
Yeah, so I don't want to get too biochemical on anybody, but yeah.
Amazing. Okay, real quick, we might have a minute. Artificial sweeteners.
Yeah, so the studies out there on artificial sweeteners, they don't show that people are losing weight when they're switching to artificial sweeteners. It may be that the body is compensating by eating more or making different use of things, but just switching to an artificial sweetener does not seem to help people reduce their weight if that's the only thing that's happening in their lives. Now, if you're doing more exercise, you're watching everything that you're eating, then that's a different story. But just switching to an artificial sweetener does not generally cut your weight.
So the burger and the Diet Coke won't make it? All right.
Not necessarily.
Wow. Chris Sylvain, Health Issues. As you can see, I'm totally excited because this is information that people need, and you have to understand Dr. Bazzano, she's a nutrition researcher, and we can talk all day long about the fact that we need to know more about nutrition. These things are complicated. They're very, very complex. That's why people are trying so hard and not losing weight. But we have to find out the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Thank you so much. HealthIssues2010.org on the web. Work as hard as you can and eat whole grains. That'll work.